Welcome to the Bible Journey. My name is Mark Green, and I'm the pastor of adult ministries at Otterbein Church. Coming to you today at the end of a cold, so if you'll bear with my voice, I would appreciate it. This week we are reading Acts chapters 22 to 26. And before we dive into this, let's back up and do a little recap. Acts 13 through 21 record the three missionary journeys of Paul, with a brief stop in Acts 15 in Jerusalem to handle a dispute over the law and to see how the law was to apply to the Gentiles who have come to Christ. We have watched Paul proclaim the gospel, endure massive hardships, and most importantly, we have seen the gospel spreading out into the whole world, changing the lives of people. Quick reminder, Paul finished his portion of the race. In Acts chapter 21, he finished his last missionary journey. He's not done. He's going to do some great things yet. But when Paul finished his journeys, he is, in one sense, passing the torch to us. We are the continuation of the Church of Jesus Christ reaching into the world. So let's finish well. Let's continue to carry the torch. As God promised, circumstances are falling in place for Paul to go to Rome, where he is going to present the message of Christ to the highest echelons of Roman power. This is so cool. In the next few chapters, Paul is going to be defending his life and message before people high in the Roman government. And as you read Paul's speeches, take some time to consider how well prepared are you to defend the gospel. If you were thrown before leadership in the community or in a government or anywhere, how prepared are you to defend the gospel? When we left Paul in Acts 21, he had been again arrested in Jerusalem. This seems to be his motive. He was accused by the Jewish leaders of a false claim that he had brought a Gentile into the temple. Now that doesn't sound like a big deal to us, but in Jewish religious culture, to bring a Gentile into the temple was just blasphemous. Chaos ensues, and it forces the Roman soldiers to step in order to provide some sense of peace and to end the chaos. Paul persuades the tribune to let him address the crowd, and in Acts 22, he records his speech, and at Acts 22 to 30 records the response. Remember, Paul is addressing a Jewish audience, so he organizes his defense around what a Jewish audience would understand. He addresses them in Aramaic, and by doing so, it immediately causes the whole crowd to stop. Here is someone who they think is a Roman talking to them in their own language. He is not defending himself to the Romans. He's defending himself to fellow Jews. Paul's speech could be organized around three basic arguments. In verses 3 through 5, Paul says, I was where you are. He describes his background, his opposition to Jesus, his persecution of the church. Hey, I understand. I was where you are. In verses 6 through 14, he says, I was called by God, and he recalls the Damascus Road experience. Finally, in verses 15 to 21, he says, I was called to be a witness to the nation, which includes the Gentiles. And it is this part that gets him into trouble. So far, they're all good. But as soon as he tells them that the gospel has come to the Gentiles, everything explodes again. Paul's argument that Israel's God has welcomed Gentiles is just too much for the crowd. This seems to affirm to them that Paul was indeed guilty of welcoming Gentiles into the temple. The Jewish crowd erupts in anger at Paul's belief that God would welcome Gentiles. Imagine that. They're exploding with anger because God welcomes someone not like them. It's a lesson there for us. The irony is they rail against Gentiles coming to Christ in the very right in front of Gentile Roman soldiers. It just seems so callous. The tribune orders Paul to be returned to the barracks, where he intends to flog him into telling the truth. You got to appreciate the Roman solution to everything. We're just going to beat the truth out of them. That's Rome's answer to everything. We have power. We're going to beat the truth out of them. So they get back to the barracks and are about to start the flogging when Paul informs them that, hey guys, just so you know, I'm a Roman citizen. Now that's so important. Stop everything. According to the Roman historian and scholar Cicero, he said this, To bind a Roman citizen is a crime. To flog him an abomination. To slay him is almost an act of murder. So the tribune immediately halts everything and tells the Jewish council to meet the next day to settle the matter. He is not going to do this to a Roman citizen. Acts 23 opens with Paul once again defending himself to the Jewish council. He begins by claiming to have lived righteously before God and stands before them with a clear conscience. I am innocent. And in response to this, the high priest orders Paul to be slapped for his comments. Why did he do that? The reason for this is the high priest believes Paul to be guilty, and when Paul claims to be innocent, he accuses Paul of slandering the name of God and orders him to be slapped. Paul reacts quickly, even maybe with a hint of anger, and accuses them of being whitewashed wall and guilty before God for breaking the very law that he is upholding. This is basically appears saying to them, like we have read earlier in the Sermon on the Mount, you appear to be righteous, but on the inside you are not. It is meant as an insult and is taken accordingly. In essence, everyone is accusing one another of breaking the Jewish law, and no one is listening to one another. There's another lesson for us. Realizing the whole thing is going nowhere, and that Paul looks around and goes, there are Pharisees here, there are Sadducees here. I know what both of them believe, and I'm an ex-Pharisee. So Paul, I think Paul's doing this intentionally. He's going to jab, and he says, I'm going to stir the pot by pulling up a philosophical and theological difference. And Paul says, I am on trial for the resurrection of the dead. The Pharisees believed that, the Sadducees did not. Chaos ensues, and the tribune once again steps in and returns Paul to the barracks. And the remainder of the chapter reveals a plot to kill Paul, the uncovering of the plot, and the decision to send Paul to the Governor Felix under cover of night in order to protect him. So you can see how this is moving towards Rome. Chapter 24. It continues the same narrative after a 5-day break. During this time, the high priest Ananias, several Jewish elders, and a lawyer arrive in Caesarea where Felix was. The lawyer stands up on behalf of the Jewish leaders and presents his case and praises Felix as a wise and benevolent leader, and then lays out his charges against Paul. And here they are. Paul is a plague that continues to stir up riots among the Jews throughout the world. Okay. Second, Paul is the ringleader of the Nazarenes, a political sect. That's not true. In essence, Paul is a danger to civic peace. He's making his argument primarily based on what the Romans would consider a threat, so that the Romans would do what they could not. Third, Paul tried to profane the temple by bringing Gentiles into it. So Paul is a political, a civil, and a religious nuisance. Convicting. Now it's Paul's turn. Paul begins simply in verses 10 through 13. I am innocent of all these charges, and an inquiry would prove that I did none of those things. Paul then admits or confesses to several things. Here, if you want to accuse me of something, here's what I'm guilty of. First, I am indeed a follower of the way and a worshiper of God according to the law and the prophets. Second, I confess to believing in the resurrection of the just and the unjust. Knowing this, Paul strives to live a blameless life. So if you want to accuse me of being a follower of Jesus who believes in the resurrection of the just and the unjust. That's it. Paul then turns to what brought him to Jerusalem and his plight. He returned originally to bring a financial gift and to worship in the temple. He purified himself before entering the temple so there would be no conflict, so the charge is not correct. Then some Jews from Asia showed up and accused him of breaking the law, but none of those men were present to accuse him. You see what's happening here? This is just a facade trial. There's no truth in it. Finally, Paul says, the one true accusation that is made against him is the resurrection of the dead, and for that I claim guilt. That's why I'm on trial. The chapter ends, and this will frustrate us. I hope it will anyway. The chapter ends with Felix leaving Paul in jail but giving him some liberty to let his friends come and care for him. If you will notice, Paul leaves him in jail for 2 years. 2 years. Why? Because he can. Men and women, government overreach is not a new struggle. Second, he leaves him there because he was hoping for a bribe, even though by Roman law that was against the Roman law. He couldn't do that. Third, because he wants to, this is so interesting, he wants to have conversations with Paul about righteousness, self-control, and coming judgment whenever he wants. It's interesting that Felix wants to have conversations about righteousness and self-control while demonstrating neither one of those. So Paul, let's have some righteous conversations while I live unrighteous. As we read about Paul's time in Rome, a couple of things come to mind for us. First, we often clamor for fairness from the people around us and the authorities in our world. But just like in Paul's day, broken, godless people will find it difficult to exercise wise judgments and do what is right. As followers of Jesus, when being treated unfairly for our commitment to Christ, we are of course free to ask for and pursue justice. But we must do so with a greater eye toward uplifting Christ before a godless world. Because I think it is in moments like these that the gospel shines the brightest. Second, we've got to be ready to offer a reasoned explanation for why Christ is the Savior. And our personal testimony, that's great and that's good, but often we can't stop there. We need to be able to explain the story of Christ and reason with people from the scriptures how it demonstrates that Jesus is the Messiah. As the story progresses, Paul is going to make his way to Rome, and we're going to have several exciting adventures on the way there. In the meantime, I hope you will find great joy in your journey of reading the Bible.